Show.
You too. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Do you support progressive ideas? Do you want to wear clothes that reflect your progressive values and not a corporate logo? Then buy from You Resist. You Resist is an organization dedicated to promoting progressive initiatives with non-corporate logos. We create and sell clothing with progressive graphics. Visit You Resist at youresist.org or at facebook.com/you.resist. Wear your resistance. Welcome back, everybody. We're now joined by a very special guest. She is running for Congress in New York's 14th Congressional District. Her name is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and we are honored to have her on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alexandria.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me.
No problem. Yeah, we love supporting progressive candidates, especially ones that are fairly local to us. We had Tom Prigg on a few weeks ago. He's running in near Pittsburgh. I forgot what district that is. Do you remember what district that was?
The 12th, I believe.
Was it 12th?
Yeah.
So we love having any candidate that's for change on. So we're very excited for today.
Great. Yeah, I'm so happy to be on.
Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself as a person and why you're running for Congress? What made you want to run for Congress?
Yeah, of course. So again, my name's Alexandria. I am a third-generation Bronxite. I was born in the Bronx. My father's from the Bronx. My grandmother came to the Bronx from Puerto Rico, and my family's been here for the last, I'd say, 50 or so years.
Oh, wow.
And my family, my father had a small business here. My parents met in Puerto Rico, but they started our family here. And, I never really thought about, this wasn't kind of like in the deck for me, especially, being born to a really working class family. I wasn't born, wasn't born with a lot of resources or political connections or with any sort of connection to the, particularly daunting political machine here in New York City. And so, when I was a kid, I was actually very interested in science and possibly going into medicine. And but when I was young, my family, we were forced to move. Public school in the Bronx in the late 80s and the early 90s was not a pretty place to be. And my parents knew really early on that if I were to have a shot, we needed to move to a public school district that was able to serve its children properly. And so from a really young age, I saw the impact that the zip code that you're born in has on your prospects for a future. And so community has always been very important to me, whether it's how a person has access to their health care or their education. It's, just caring about your community has always been a value to me and my family. It's always been part of being a full human being. And I had the privilege of going to college. I was, the first on my mom's side of the family, first generation to go to college. And in school, I started caring more about these issues. I started becoming much more deeply invested in policy. I worked for Ted Kennedy. I spent some time in West Africa with working on maternal health and public health. And I realized at that time, especially when Citizens United passed, that if I really wanted to impact communities, that politics actually wasn't the place to be.
Right.
I felt like the money was too powerful, the dynastic, powers were too powerful. And as just a regular working person, there wasn't a place for me in politics. And so I turned to doing more direct work with my communities. And after I graduated, I moved back to the Bronx. I started working on a social enterprise. But, also at that time, the financial crisis hit. And my father had passed away due to cancer. And
sorry to
all
hear
of a
that.
sudden, but these are the things that happen to Americans everywhere.
Yeah.
It's just, this is life. It's life. And the opportunities and the safety nets that are there for us when life happens, is having that there is so important for people to be able to continue to pursue opportunity in their lives. And so kind of when the floor kind of and the rug kind of came out from under us in that time. You know, my family was on the brink of foreclosure, and I started waitressing in restaurants to help keep my family afloat. And in that time, like, you just really see, and you really experience, I really experienced, like many other Americans, what it's like to be just a normal working person in the United States. And it's amazing, but too many of our elected represented officials don't know what it's like to lead a real life, trying to work 18-hour days to make ends meet. And when the Bernie Sanders campaign started again, I really saw that it really proved to me that politics and democracy, real democracy, is still viable in this country. And I think a lot of us had kind of given up on that idea, but we really all realized last year that this is possible and this is doable, but it takes all hands on deck. It takes a mass commitment. And so I started organizing for the Bernie Sanders campaign in the South Bronx. And after the election, I really felt like the whole country was kind of disconnected in terms of how we were communicating with each other. So I went and I traveled cross country. I stopped in Ohio with some friends, stopped in Flint, Michigan, Indiana, Minneapolis, and we really started talking to everyday Americans. And we really started figuring out that even on both sides of the aisle, even though some people may not have been able to possibly understand how someone they knew could have voted differently from them, that there really was actually a very broad consensus in this country on political corruption and the influence of corporations in politics. You know, whether you're Republican or Democrat, there are many, many, many Americans that are very concerned about this issue. And we ended this trip at Standing Rock, and I spent days at Standing Rock where we literally saw private corporations hiring private militias to overrun democratic will and democratic systems. And when I got back, I had gotten a call from brand new Congress saying that I had been nominated to run for office.
Oh, wow.
And that's how this whole thing really kicked off, because brand new Congress is a national effort to mount dozens of primary challengers in the 2018 midterm elections on both sides of the aisle. And they run on a nomination. It's very kind of a Washingtonian model where your peers nominate members of the community to represent them, you know, and which is really kind of how it should be when you think about it. And when I had gotten the call, I spent a lot of time talking with brand new Congress, and we went through about 6 months of vetting in both directions. And I kind of thinking, am I really about to do this big, crazy thing? And them saying, are we really about to float this candidate? and, you know, long story short, we just announced 4 weeks ago, we've in 3 weeks, we organized the second largest amount of donors than any New York City campaign has in the last 6 months.
That's incredible.
The momentum and the energy and the will is there, particularly in New York City. People think of New York and New York City in particular as this liberal haven, but there are a lot of ways in which we are very imperfect, particularly when it comes to our voting laws and corporate influence over politicians. And the machine here is very strong. The machine in New York 14 has had a vice grip over every small seat, as small as community board and county committee, which are unpaid positions. And people are really hungry for change, for a real democracy again. And we're tired of people being appointed to seats that they don't deserve, to communities that they don't represent. And so we're here to change that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. And you made a good point, too, where you said it almost seemed like everybody had this feeling of being beaten down, and they've given up on the system. For the longest time, I was settling for what I could get. These, corporate Democrats who really weren't going to do much for you, but
just weren't outwardly bigots.
That's Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And now there's this wave of progressivism that's like exciting because we can finally support people who we actually believe will help, which is it's great to see as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point too, because we hear this talk and these terms about identity politics and this and that. And you hear, these terms that just get everybody so upset, like everything from like, oh, this is racist, or that's a safe space, or you're a snowflake, or all of this stuff. But really, it is true what you're saying, in that when one party stands up for just basic civil rights and the other one doesn't, then both parties really hold you hostage to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because then if one party just says, okay, I just believe that you're a human being that deserves equal opportunity, then that means that they can get away with advancing policies that make it harder to be a working class person. And we can, like, both are possible. And it's so unrepresentative of how Americans actually feel. The majority of Americans support marriage equality.
Right.
The vast majority of Americans believe in human caused contributions to climate change. The vast majority of Americans believe in very basic levels of gun control, like keeping severely mentally people away from having a gun. And these are things that we have broad American consensus on, but Congress seems to be deadlocked over.
Right.
And it's because of this basic issue, because of lobbying. And they're not being representative of the people's will. And it's because of the influence of money in politics.
So you mentioned a little bit about donations before. Could you tell us a little more about how your campaign's being funded?
Yes. So as a brand new Congress and Justice Democrats endorsed candidate, I do not take any large corporate contributions. I do not even take any PAC money either.
That's awesome.
That is great.
There are, and PACs, political action committees, there are several that have endorsed our campaign.
Right.
And, that insofar as that, I think that's fine. If they want to call attention to the issues that we're raising in the campaign, if they want to educate people and make them more aware of who we are and endorse us, that's fantastic. But in terms of money that is untrackable, untraceable, that can kind of change hands over and over again, it's a legal money laundering system for our government.
Yep.
And it's not, it's corruption.
It is.
And no one wants to use that word. No one wants to use the C word, that's the word.
But it's exactly what it is, yeah.
And it is. You gotta call a spade, and this is legalized corruption. When my opponent, there was a White House ethics inquiry opened into him a couple years ago, and they love to say he got off. But when you explain the actual situation, it's like, basically what happened was that this was post the financial crisis. There was a bill on the floor of Congress talking about Wall Street regulation, imposing further regulations on these big banks that were too big to fail and caused so many people to foreclose on their homes. He left the floor of Congress in the middle of debate to go to a Wall Street hosted fundraiser.
Wow.
And when he came back, he flipped and voted against Wall Street regulation.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Right in the wake of the financial crisis. And if that is not a compromised vote, I do not know what
That's
is.
100% a compromised vote.
That's unreal.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And well, you mentioned a little bit about your opponent. Can you tell us more about your opponent or opponents? I'm not sure if there's other people that are also going to be running.
It's so I'm the only candidate crazy enough to challenge Joseph Crowley in the last 10 to 15 years.
Oh wow. Wow.
He has never had a serious primary opponent, almost in his entire political career, to be honest.
Jeez.
He's only been challenged. Yeah, and the reason for that is because he comes from a 3-generation political machine in Queens. His uncle was a councilman, and they've basically been playing musical chairs with political seats throughout Queens and New York City. And he's unelected. So he got this seat on a technicality. He was very, very close. His boss former boss was the previous incumbent.
Okay.
And what they did was the previous